Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Helen Corner-Bryant, author of On Editing, How to Edit Your Novel the Professional Way. Helen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me.
Are you ready to get started?
Sure am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Sure. As well as being an author, I also run Cornerstones, which is an editing house. So we advise authors all the time on how to write, edit, and get an agent and get published. So I've got two hats, a writer, author hat and a Cornerstones hat. And one of the things we come across probably I would say on a daily basis, which is really understandable, is how do I get an agent? How do I get published? And very often also, how do I self-publish? And I totally understand that. I think it's such a drive and it's such a valid agenda for us all. But I really wish sometimes I could sit with an author and say, don't worry, be patient, sit with your craft, sit with your writing, really learn to love writing and learn techniques on how to revise it and make it stronger. And I think it's be patient and learn to love the process. And if you get the process right, then getting published or getting an agent should hopefully and naturally follow. So my one piece of advice to authors is to enjoy the journey.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think I've seen so many author journeys, and I've been with so many authors from beginning to end, down to up to book 50 or what have you. And I think if a published author spoke to themselves as an unpublished author and said, do you know what, the journey is actually like this, but please keep going because it's worth it, don't give up, I think it would be really reassuring. An author's journey has so many ups and downs. It's sort of almost in a more high octane way sometimes than life gives you. And when you're riding the peaks, it's amazing. And then when you hit the troughs, you're despairing. And it's like a really slippery thing in your life where one minute you're totally in love with it and the next you're down in the dumps and want to give it all up. And I think just keep going. And remember that your imagination and your inspiration is there and your talent is always there, and not to give up on yourself. Maybe the hardest part about getting published is getting an agent and a publisher. But even once that has happened, thinking up book 2 and book 3 and all of that it's kind of ongoing, but just don't give up.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, so my book On Editing was originally another book, but On Editing is sort of a revamped, more immersive edition. And one of the reasons I wanted to, I was explaining to you, Paul, that I reverted the rights on the first book in order to revisit it and rewrite it, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then the same publisher bought it back. And one of my main reasons, obviously, is to be published by a trade publisher, and that's amazing. But it's a marketing tool for Cornerstones, what we do here. But also, I love teaching, so I do a lot of university guest lecturing, and I really wanted to teach. And I set up an online editing course, which is 5 months, and it's all about perfecting your submission to present to agents. And then you have access to a list of agents, mainly in the UK, at the end of it. And I think, if I'm being really honest, one of my main reasons for getting a trade publisher to publish my book was to run the online courses, which is very satisfying for me and for Cornerstone. So we launched last year, and we put through 33 students last year. And that, for me, is really brilliant.
That's pretty awesome. 33 students in 1 year.
Yeah. I have an example of an author of ours who wrote a book about climbing. It was a thriller, and he climbed a mountain. And one of the marketing strategies, PR sort of things that he did for that book, was to wheel a wheelbarrow of his books to the base of Snowdonia, which is one of the tallest mountains in the UK. And he said, he left a note saying, please take a copy of my book, but if you do, please leave a review. And within the day, the whole wheelbarrow had emptied. And I thought, it's being innovative. If you are published, it's trying to see how you might catch a reader's eye in ways that is refreshing. So if you are getting published as an author, you need to constantly think how you can promote your book, and what kind of thing can you do to get out there and basically shout about it, but in a way that feels refreshing.
And what strategies have you seen on social media that you feel will work well for those that might not necessarily want to venture out? Because, as you know, as I'm sure you know, a lot of authors are introverted, and not all of them really want to put on that promotional hat. But you have to realize you have to. I mean, you have to run your launch like a business. So what strategies would you have with that?
So, I mean, when you're a writer, and you're published, you are running a business, as you know. And if you can't get out and about, that's fine. But having a presence on social media, Facebook, Twitter, website at the very least is also very good. And a lot of if you're very good at social media, then you can try and get followings and sort of it's a really hugely effective way. But I know a lot of authors that don't like social media.
Yeah.
But there are companies that do it for you, and there are other ways. If you're no good at Twitter and you're no good at Facebook and things like that, then there are other ways around it. I think it's just about trying to get yourself heard in the best way possible, and there will be ways to do that feel comfortable for you, because there's nothing worse than doing something, particularly on social media, if you're not comfortable with it. And I talk to a lot of agents and publishers about authors that want to get published and are brilliantly talented and their story's fantastic. And I say these days it's so important, it's imperative to have social media presence, isn't it? And a lot of them say, well, if you're good at it, fantastic. And if you're not good at it and it doesn't feel good for you, then don't worry about it too much.
Well, and I love the fact that you mentioned outsourcing. I think that's such a great thing people can do, because if you don't want to mess with social media, then fine. Outsource it to companies that will. There's plenty of digital marketers out there. You could do a simple Google search and find people out there that be willing to do that at fairly decent prices. So you don't necessarily have to do those things. But if you're comfortable doing it, great. But if you don't, just go there and outsource it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Get an expert.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Okay, so this is really hard for me, as I'm sure it is for a lot of your guests, to try and narrow it down. But I'm recently listening on audio Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Have you come across that book?
I have not. It's one of the few I haven't.
Okay, so it's a classic, and it was, but you wouldn't necessarily know about it. It's it's kind of thing that I grew up with, and I love it because it's it's about a girl who meets this man in Italy, and it turns out he's incredibly rich and owns this huge house in Cornwall in the UK. And they fall in love, and he marries her, and he takes her back. It's sort of set in the 1930s, takes her back to his house. And she's absolutely terrified. She feels completely out of her depth, and she doesn't feel good enough. And the whole story is about it. As it turns out, her husband, his first wife, died, and no one quite knows how or why. She was found drowned in the sea, and it's the shadow and the haunting of the first wife that completely consumes the new wife. And what I really love about this book is Daphne du Maurier, back in the sort of 30s, was had all the elements of a psychological thriller to hook a reader and keep them interested. And she has a simmering tension, this sort of gothic way of weaving the atmosphere and environment onto the page. And the second wife, is never named. And ordinarily, one might say to an author with a character and their protagonist, it's really important that the reader knows who the protagonist is and understands and cares deeply about them and is connected to them. And I just think it's brilliant how Daphne du Maurier does this without naming the character, and yet you care deeply about her. It's first person and the conflict is ever present, and she's just a master at tension, sizzling tension.
Nice. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I think it has to be, are you familiar with Elmore Leonard and his 10 rules of writing?
Mm-hmm.
We teach that a lot. So if it sounds like writing, rewrite it. Don't open with the weather. Only use said. Avoid prologues. Leave out parts that readers skip, if only. And avoid suddenlies and detailed character descriptions and places and things. Yeah. So he's brilliant at encapsulating all the no's that we all do in our writing. But the good thing about editing is that you know what to do about it.
I love it. And I love those commandments too. I think any author, that should be one of the first things you check out.
Absolutely.
Well, Helen, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, sure. It's so probably is the company Cornerstones, so www.cornerstones.co.uk. And we're also in the States, so cornerstonesus.com. And we have Twitter, which is at cornerstoneslit. And we run a lot of Q&As on Twitter, so anyone can follow us. And we do about one a month. So come join us.
Well, Helen, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.